You might think you know the answer to the question, what is the Bible? But it is actually a bit more complex than you might first think. Firstly, is it one book or many books? Yes, we might have one book in our hand, but then we say, turn to the book of Job, and we find a book within a book. Who wrote the Bible? This video will explore some of these questions and help you increase your understanding of the Christian sacred text, the Bible. When was the Bible written? That's a good question, and one which we can't give a definitive answer to. It's not like a novel that was produced in 2016, but is a collection of writings produced over time. The Bible is a collection of writings which come from different times and different places with many different authors. Many of the stories of the Bible were passed on by word of mouth before they were written down. This is called an oral tradition. Around 3,500 years ago, the first parts of the Bible were written down. The ancient Egyptians wrote hieroglyphics on clay tablets over 5,000 years ago, but from that time, the Egyptians invented papyrus, and it became more common to write on that. Several scrolls have been found in the Middle East from thousands of years ago. They contain parts of the Hebrew scriptures that are the Jewish Torah and became the Christian Old Testament. One important place in which scrolls were found was the caves at Qumran in the Dead Sea. These scrolls have become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and some may date from as early as the 8th century BC. There are very few examples of texts that are this old and survive. A part of the Book of Numbers was found in Jerusalem from around the 6th century BC, and the En-Gedi scroll, a part of the Torah from Leviticus, was found in a synagogue that had burnt down, which also dates from around the same time. You can find out a lot of information about the Dead Sea Scrolls with a quick search online. So the Old Testament texts were written over about a century and a half, from around 1500 BC to shortly before Jesus was born, although it is difficult to know as there are very few surviving texts from the time. The New Testament began to be written about 30 years after Jesus died. Many of his followers had kept alive his message through their words and actions, but there came a point at which it was sensible to put this down in writing. The time period in which the New Testament was written is much shorter than the Old Testament. It was written over approximately half a century, or 50 years, rather than 1,500 years. As the Bible was written between 3,500 and nearly 2,000 years ago, it is difficult to say who wrote any part of it. The first 5 books of the Old Testament are traditionally called the books of Moses, but investigation suggests there were many different authors. Likewise, it is unlikely that the prophets wrote any of the books that are named after them, though a prophet may have given spirit to the writing or inspired it. It is likely that none of the gospel writers were actually Jesus' close circle of disciples. However, the early Christian followers who wrote the books of the New Testament probably knew people who had met Jesus. The gospel writers were probably living in and around Jerusalem, here on the map. But Christianity quickly spread across land and sea. Paul, who had persecuted Christians before converting to Christianity, traveled around the communities of early Christians, but because he couldn't be present in all of them, he wrote them letters to such places as Corinth, here on the map, in modern-day Greece. The map on the screen shows the extent of the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. 2 centuries after all of the Bible texts had been written, Christianity spread rapidly around the Roman Empire. You might be surprised to learn that the Bible is the best-selling book around the world. Guinness World Records suggests that in the last 200 years, more than 5 billion Bibles have been sold. According to the same source, the Bible has been translated into 349 different languages, and at least 2,000 languages have at least one of the books of the Bible translated into them. Of course, being popular does not mean that it is automatically valuable, and just because a Bible has been bought does not mean that it is being read. But the sheer volume of Bibles suggests that as a widely distributed book, it must have some importance and influence on those who buy it. Out of interest, you can see on the screen the next most popular book is quotations from the work of Mao Zedong, but with less than a quarter of the popularity of the Bible, closely followed by Harry Potter.